Inclusive leadership has evolved from a nice-to-have into a definitive capability that separates high-performing teams and organizations from the average. The DCA Suncorp Inclusion at Work Index found that people who belong to inclusive teams are 10 times more likely to be rated as effective than people who do not. So it comes as no surprise that organizations are looking for ways to build inclusive leadership capability. The problem is, as is true for lots of types of soft skills training, that what leaders learn in the classroom doesn't last. When they get back to their teams in the workplace, with all of its pressures and deadlines, it actually becomes very difficult to implement new habits, routines, and behaviors. Here are 3 factors that we have found are essential to building a successful inclusion skills program. The first is that it must be linked to core business strategy. Otherwise, it's very hard to argue that it is more than just a nice to have. Many organizations struggle with this, and this is largely because they define inclusion in a pretty narrow way, which is just about creating a sense of belonging or ensuring that people work well together. Whilst this is valuable in and of itself, it's very different to showing leaders that inclusion can lead to high performance, incredible innovation, and greater collaboration across the enterprise. This presents a much more powerful what's in it for me that will motivate people to implement new inclusive skills. Secondly, you've got to measure it and hold people accountable. The fact is, many organizations are only measuring diversity and they're just not measuring inclusion. And the reality is, when people go back into their teams and have their whole list of KPIs, if you're not measuring inclusion, it's going to be deprioritized behind something that is being measured on a regular basis. Engagement surveys are often too superficial. The reality is, you need to be able to show leaders what inclusion looks like on a day-to-day basis and measure those behaviors. This gives you the tool to hold them accountable for making improvements and also motivates them when they can see that they're improving in these measures. Finally, your inclusion skills program must have many touch points. Many programs rely on a single workshop, whether it's 2 hours, half a day, or 2 days, as the major catalyst for driving change. The problem is that, again, when leaders go back to their teams, they find that what they've learned about is actually much harder to implement in practice than they thought. It's going to require iteration, and it's going to require a lot of open discussion in their teams. As such, a good inclusion skills program is going to have a long-term focus and keep supporting leaders and teams to deal with those challenges and have the discussions that they need to have in order to build new inclusive behaviors and habits. Symetra's most successful inclusion skills programs always include these 3 factors. We work closely with executives to make a clear strategic link with the goals of the organization. We use inclusion assessment tools to measure day-to-day observable inclusive behaviors. And we will use things like nudge coaching, toolkits, and regular deployment of digital learning to continue to support leaders and their teams to go through a change journey. It's by doing all these things that we enable companies to leverage the full intellectual capital of their people and survive in an ever-changing and dynamic marketplace. For more information on Symetra's Inclusion for Performance program, visit symetra.com.au.